Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, March 18th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the generic congressional vote and the 2024 election, in which new polls from The Economist, YouGov, Yahoo News, and Emerson College all seem to be indicating a change in direction in the generic congressional vote across the national average here, with Republicans currently up by 0.7%. The three most recent polls, and the only polls taken in the month of March in this year, show Democrats ahead in all three of these polls after months of consistent Republican advantages in these polls. When we're taking a look at our first one, The Economist YouGov released a poll actually earlier on this month. Today they have the Democrats up by 1, but a week and a half ago they had the Republicans up by 2. Yahoo News did a poll a little bit further back in the end of January showing the Democrats ahead by 1 point. Today they had the Democrats ahead by 2. And Emerson College did a poll in mid-February around Valentine's Day in which they had the Republicans up by 2, and today they have the Democrats up by 2. And so that's a 4-point swing on Emerson, a 1-point swing on Yahoo News, and a 3-point swing on The Economist and YouGov poll here, all of which in the leftward direction in favor of the Democratic Party. So why is this significant? Why do we care about the generic congressional vote? Well, it actually doesn't seem to be matching what we're seeing here when it comes down to the general election data between President Trump and President Biden. Right now, Donald Trump has a 1.7% advantage over Joe Biden in this head-to-head matchup, and in many of the same polls here, Donald Trump leads the national average, while Democrats, in fact, lead the generic congressional vote. Now, the generic congressional vote is more so an indicator of where the American public is voting in down-ballot races. It isn't just, of course, for Congress here. This is gauging people. If you had the option of voting for a generic Democrat or a generic Republican, who would you end up picking? And that's why it's significant here that Democrats are now making advancements in the generic congressional vote column, because this has huge implications for down-ballot Senate, House, and state legislative races that could truly determine the future of not only their states, their districts, but also the country here. When we take a look at the most recent poll from The Economist and YouGov, nationally speaking, they show Donald Trump with a 2-point advantage. Yahoo News also shows Donald Trump with a 2-point advantage, but Emerson actually shows Biden with a 2-point advantage across the country. So it pretty much matches up the generic congressional vote when it comes down to Emerson College, but Yahoo News shows roughly a 3-point advantage here, 4-point advantage here for Democrats compared to President Biden. When it comes down to The Economist and YouGov, it's Trump plus 2, it's Democrat plus 1. That's roughly a 3-point shift. And so on average here, what we're seeing is that although the Republicans have a lead of 0.7%, in the most recent polls taken in the month of March, Democrats seem to be making advancements when it comes down to congressional elections rather than the presidential. And of course, they'd like to be making advancements in both, but this is a good sign, at least when it comes down to the House of Representatives. The 2022 House elections went off pretty poorly, I would say, for Republicans compared to what they were expecting. Just weeks out from the 2022 midterm elections, you had Kevin McCarthy, who at the time was the minority leader, but soon became the majority leader after this election here, no longer, of course, serving in the speakership or in any leadership position, but that's besides the point. What happened here was that he was projecting the Republicans were going to pick up anywhere from 50 to 60 seats. And everyone was looking at him saying, you know, where are you getting these numbers? But it wasn't too far off from what we actually might have seen if this was an election year like 2010 or 2014. In 2008, Democrats got their largest majority they had seen since the last time they held Congress, which was in 1992. Democrats had 257 seats ushered in under an Obama-era victory, and it was a very, very substantial victory. It was one that Democrats were extremely proud about. They had won over states like North and South Dakota, Mississippi, Arkansas, West Virginia, Tennessee, Idaho even. They had a singular representative from that district. And so what you found here was that Democrats were really running up the margins. And then 2010 came. Republicans completely flipped control of the House of Representatives. In 2 years, the map went from overwhelmingly blue to very, very red. States like New Jersey narrowed down. States like California and Washington narrowed down. Republicans flipped. New Hampshire flipped. Illinois flipped. All of these states, I mean, you can see very, very red to very, very blue. It was quite substantial, if you ask me. And when you take a look just at comparing the elections here, 2008 versus 2010, this country got redder in every single state with the exception of Delaware and Montana. And so that's why, you know, you look at something like this and you say, okay, wait, maybe Republicans did have a point back then, that maybe they were able to win an election like that one. In 2010, they picked up 63 seats in the House of Representatives, and the margin of victory here was roughly 7 points. And so when 2022 was coming around, and the Democrats were losing by 3 points on the national average here, while 60-something seats might have been a stretch, and Kevin McCarthy certainly was overinflating, for it to only end up being 10 was certainly not what Republicans were expecting. Now, of course, the national popular vote did go to the GOP, but 2020, I think, was also an indicator here that Democrats, in fact, needed to have an even more substantial election victory on the national in order to maintain or win over House control in 2024. But 2022 sort of puts a stop on that. We were working under the assumption that because Democrats did win the national popular vote by 3 to 4 points in 2020 and only ended up with a 10-seat advantage in the House of Representatives, that's similar to the presidential elections, similar to how we've seen nationalized races for Democrats, they always need to do better in the popular vote than what the actual composition of the House, the Electoral College, or the Senate ends up being. Because it requires Democrats to win over not only the majority of the country, which at default was assumed did lean left, but in fact they would have to win over more than that. And 2020 affirmed that conclusion, in which Democrats only were able to win an advantage 222 to 213 by winning the popular vote by 4 points on the congressional level and 5 points on the presidential. But of course, like we've seen in recent elections, 2022 did in fact change everything. Despite the national popular vote shifting in favor of the GOP roughly 7 points to the right of where it was in 2020, 11 points to the right of where it was in 2018, Republicans came up short in many close and competitive states, which means for them to maintain House control, the same argument can be thrown onto them. If they aren't winning the national popular vote by 3, they may very well lose House control. And that's because after the 2020 census and the redistricting process for the next decade, Democrats actually came out with a lot stronger proposals in terms of gerrymandering and winning over court cases in some crucial states where it refused to allow Republicans to gerrymander and crack some of these battleground districts and battleground states themselves. Of course, Republicans did have the upper hand in states like Texas. There was no reality in which a Texas Supreme Court was going to strike down their maps. Same thing in the state of Florida here. Republicans went to the extreme and extremely gerrymandered this state into oblivion compared to what it was even in 2018, when Democrats nearly won over the majority of the districts in the state of Florida. Today, they hold roughly a third of them. But Democrats, again, were able to prevent the Republican Party from having complete and total dominance in states like Ohio, for instance, in which Democrats were able to maintain this map here, which was actually better than the one that they had in previous elections. When you look at other states, too, where Democrats ensured that they were able to have their own victories in states like New Mexico and Nevada and Colorado, and states where maybe, in some instances they didn't have the most beautifully drawn map, but they were able to maintain them. In a state like Illinois, where they ensured Republicans were winning just 3 out of the 17 seats. I mean, just take a look at some of these districts. Democrats, for once, seemingly, fought fire with fire on a gerrymandering level. Of course, they had their own faults. They had their own, losses when it came down to their congressional maps here, but at the end of the day, Democrats did well, not only because of the Dobbs decision and outperforming expectations, but also because they drew a map that Republicans were not going to be easily able to flip over. And Republicans failed to realize that in some of their ways of drawing their map, they actually added in more competitive districts and more competitive seats than they otherwise could have thought of. And when you are taking a look at these most competitive districts column and Republicans expected to win narrowly column, in the lean Democratic column and the safe Democratic column, Republicans did not win one. The same cannot be said on the other side of the aisle. In the most competitive districts and the Republicans expected to win narrowly, Democrats won most of the competitive districts here. And when it came down to Republicans expected to win narrowly, you're talking this is the margin here in which they expect somebody to be within 5 to 15%. It isn't expected to be as close as districts like Arizona's 6th, which was 1.5, or districts across here like Iowa's 3rd, which was Republican plus 0.9, or Michigan's 10th, which was Republican plus 0.49, right? These districts here, in fact, some of them, like Washington's 3rd, was expected to go to the GOP and ended up going to the Democrats. And for many of these races, the Democrats did end up winning. For instance, Alaska at large, which Democrats won by 10 points, or California's 47th district, where they win by 3 or 5. These are the margins you would expect to see maybe in a lean column, but to see them in the toss-up column tells us that in many instances, the most competitive races were ones won by Republicans, which means they have no room for error. Some of the closest races that truly could have determined the balance of power. I mean, if we shifted the election results from 2022 by a singular percentage point in favor of the Democratic Party, Arizona's 1st would have gone blue. California's 13th would have gone blue. Let's see here. New York's 17th. New York's 22nd. And we move over to the lean column and we find even more. Iowa's 3rd. Michigan's 10th. And that's it on that column. And then also Colorado's 3rd district with Lauren Boebert, which was a shockingly very, very competitive race there because she was so exceptionally unpopular. And I don't think there were any others because that was the real sleeper of the race here. And so of those districts, that was 7 districts that a 1-point national shift would have translated to a 7 7-seat swing in favor of the Democratic Party, giving them just a net loss of 2 seats, and the majority would have been maintained by Democrats. That's how close these House elections were, and the exact reason why there is no room for error for the Republican Party across these states. They got lucky with how some of these districts went in New York. They were lucky that they were running alongside the same ballot as Governor Kathy Hochul, who won her governor's race in a solid blue state by a margin of 5 points. The top of the ticket here was one of the most lackluster Democratic performances we have seen in New York in decades. No matter what the election is, Democrats have been able to win in New York for years upon years upon years by 30, 25, 20 points minimum. And you found here that Kathy Hochul somehow reduced it to 5 points, and that translated to Republican victories in New York's 22nd, in New York 17th, again, victories in some cases like New York 19 and New York 4th, which if you were running alongside the same ballot as President Biden, you would see a reduction in support for the GOP. And in some cases, a significant reduction here. If New York alone was to take the states and, the districts here, the seats here, that were won by less than 5 points by the GOP, and flip them over to the Democratic Party, the House majority would reduce to just 1 seat for the Republican Party. And that's not accounting for countless other seats that are expected to do well for Democrats in this upcoming cycle as they focus more energy, more funding, more resources to these battleground districts in order to win them. Again, a presidential ballot is one of the best ones that a top ticket party could want to run under for their down ballot races, right? What you have here is that Democrats and Republicans are probably happy here that it's a presidential election for the sake of their congressional races, because chances are these congressional districts are not going to deviate from how they vote on the presidential level. And the problem here lies that for the Republican Party's victory in 2022, despite winning the national popular vote, it relied on a lot of things going right in a lot of solid blue states. It relied on Republicans being able to crack some of the regions of this country that have long been Democratic strongholds, including a state like New York, which prior to the 2022 midterms had a majority that Democrats were very proud of. In 2018, their advantage was 21-6. In 2022, it was 15-11. That alone accounted for the Republican Party winning control of the House of Representatives from 2018 to 2022. And you can see that Democrats are here using this generic congressional vote here as a metric to see, are they improving amongst voters in the House of Representatives, in the Senate elections, and chances are they probably are. When voters are faced with the opportunity of voting for either side of the aisle, right now this country, while seemingly leaning red, is shifting in favor of the Democratic Party. It may not be coming to the presidential race just yet, but when you look at a lot of these battleground states, when you're looking at Senate polls, for instance, when we're looking at some of the most competitive states for the 2024 Senate races, Democrats are winning almost all of them. Ohio, a Trump plus 8 state. The most likely nominee here, Bernie Moreno, is losing to Sherrod Brown by 4 points. In Pennsylvania, Bob Casey is running against Dave McCormick. In the most recent poll, leading by 4, in others by 9 and 10 points. In Minnesota, a state that Republicans are hoping will be more competitive this cycle, Amy Klobuchar is ahead by 16. In Montana, a Trump plus 20 state from 2016 and Trump plus 18-19 state from 2020, the Democrat is ahead by 2 points. You're looking at Wisconsin here. Tammy Baldwin, the incumbent Democrat in the Senate race, they're winning by 7 points. In Arizona, Ruben Gallego, the presumptive nominee for Senate for the Democratic Party in Arizona, you find he's ahead by 7 points against the Republican. I mean, it's poll after poll after poll, blue, 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 blue. And it's telling us exactly what we understand and what we know about this election cycle and what we know we can expect to see this coming November. And so looking at it too, on individual House district polls, the most recent special election in New York's 3rd Congressional District, these are heavy indicators that although the presidential margin may not be super strong for Democrats, the generic congressional vote and these down-ballot House and Senate races are. There's a reason why people are more confident that Democrats are able to win back control the House of Representatives in 2024 because of the fact that it's looking a lot better for them than it did in 2022. Right now, the race to the White House, one of the very few forecasts out there show the Democrats have a 53% chance of winning a majority here. For elections after elections, for a long time, Republicans have been able to maintain House control and, in fact, maintain the power they have either in the House or in the Senate. This election is different. Democrats now have the advantage in the House of Representatives, according to the forecast, and looking at all of these battleground states here, chances are they have the advantage in the U.S. Senate. That doesn't just happen by chance, and it certainly doesn't happen by chance when Republicans are leading the the general election data between Trump and Biden by 1.7%. What is happening on the presidential is not being reflected or trickling down, in the words of Ronald Reagan, not trickling down in favor of the GOP in these down ballot races. And Democrats have a lot to thank for that, largely candidate quality, largely the Dobbs decision, and largely the Republican Party's lackluster performance with multiple speakers, multiple leadership votes, and an overall embarrassment from the Republican Party nationwide, something that Democrats have been able to tap into and is the reason why the numbers are driving in their direction and not in favor of the Republican Party. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.